Hello, I'm Brian Giblin, and with me today I have Neil Sawyer, our Director of Human Capital. Welcome to Neo Systems webinar today, Navigating Your New HR Compliance Requirements. This webinar is part of a series we've been doing, Positioning to Win. It's everything you need to do before, during, and after that company-changing contract so that you can win that contract and then deliver successfully to your client. We opened it up with pricing to win, and where we looked at how can you price where you'll still be profitable and also be competitive to win. We went into cash flow because there's so many challenges that come from government contracting with you hire people, you start buying laptops, but you might bill the government 30 days later, and then it might be another 30 days till you get paid. So a lot of cash flow challenges come from winning big contracts. We looked at cash compliance and how that might impact you. Make sure you don't accidentally become required to be CAS compliant. We went into leveraging the cloud where you can have that scalability for your applications and all your IT needs by leveraging the cloud. We did recruiting to win last month where we looked at how can you get the key employees, get other employees, how can you make sure you have the employees you need to win and deliver on these contracts. And today, we're going to be navigating your new HR compliance requirements. And the last in this series is going to be in July, and we're going to make the case for outsourcing some of these services as they meet your needs. For our agenda today on compliance requirements, we're going to be going through some brief introductions. We're going to do this a little differently today. I'm going to do a little bit of introduction of Neo, and then I'm going to introduce Neil. And then we're going to do a little bit learning more about you, our audience. And we're going to go into looking at some of the governing statutes, take a broad brush at that, and then kind of dive into particular areas that would be of particular interest, things where we can add some tips and some best practices that will help you navigate these compliance waters. Then we're going to open it up to your questions. If at any point you have a question, please feel free to type it into the question box, and we'll be sure to get to it at the end. So a little bit about Neo Systems. At Neo Systems, we provide back office services for high compliance companies. Think nonprofits, government contractors, and particular commercial industries. We do the accounting for government contractors and other companies. We also do the IT, everything from desktop support to hosting applications in our secure private cloud. And we also do human capital. We do managed services around that where people outsource the recruiting, the onboarding, payroll, managing the performance review process. I know that's a fun one for many of you. We also take on projects such as compliance audits, helping people with their policy handbooks. These are things that we do for companies day in and day out. Now this is a pretty busy slide, so I'm going to only highlight a few areas, but just want to give you a feel for Neo Systems and who we are and what we're doing. We have our headquarters in Tysons Corner, Virginia, and we also just recently, back in January, opened up a new office in Orlando, so I'd like to highlight that. And I mentioned our secure private cloud before. Today we have about 600 companies hosted in our secure private cloud. And this represents about 50,000 employees doing their time and expense reports with Neo Systems. And finally, I just want to highlight that Neo Systems has been on the Inc. 5000 list for the past 5 years. But what we're more proud of is that we're joined this year by about 30 of our clients. So very exciting. We've been helping them grow by taking care of these back office services. Now I'm going to turn it over to Neil Sawyer, who is our Director of Human Capital at Neo Systems. Neil?
Thank you, Brian. That is not a picture of me. I'll let you know that one up front. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you folks for taking time out of your busy day to be with us here on this webinar. I appreciate that you have a lot of things you can do, and that you chose to be with us here is an honor to me. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. Other than being the Director of Human Capital for Neo Systems, I have about 25 years of HR experience in for-profit, non-profit, everything from manufacturing to high-tech to publishing and government support. Within that career span, I have been mainly interested and focused on compliance, employment law, and employee relations. So it's really exciting to get a chance to talk to people about those things that could help them in their compliance. Now, I'm going to start off by giving you a rather busy slide, but I'll also give you a spoiler alert that you don't have to worry about a lot of this. I'm just going to go over this at a high level. So when we talk about compliance, the first thing you need to see that would be applicable is all the statutes and the laws that apply. So down the left-hand side, you'll see a lot of the laws, and I will tell you up front that this listing is not comprehensive. It's some of the bigger ones, but there are lots of little laws. And the headache begins when you start to try and comply with all of those, and you're not sure which ones apply to you and how you can best be served by your policies, practices, and procedures so that you're covered by the largest areas of the law. So we're going to do that today. But I wanted to start by just kind of giving you an idea. And some of these statutes you may be familiar with, or you may be familiar with the procedures that you need to go through in order to comply with the laws, but never knew their names. In the middle column, you'll see the number of employees, and that refers to the threshold at which you become mandatory compliance for those laws. You'll notice that the first 4 or 5 of them are one employee. That means anybody that's in business, even if you are the sole employee, you are covered by this law and need to comply with it. Then you'll see as we go down the list, it starts to go up to 15 to 20 and to 50 employees. You may not be at that level now, but if you're growing your business, you'll want to know that these things are coming down the pipe, because your best offense is a good best defense is a good offense, and being proactive about things and starting implementing plans and procedures now, so as you reach those levels, you'll be better covered. And 50 employees, for the sake of our talking today, is going to be kind of the most common threshold for employees. A lot of the laws click in about that time. Then on the right-hand side, you'll see some of the things that they cover, and you'll notice that some of these things cover the same thing as other laws. That's part of the good news with all these laws. They're just slightly different flavors of each other. So don't get overly confused by those. So at this point, I want to turn it back to Brian just for a moment, and he's got a poll question for you.
Great, thank you, Neil. And yes, Neil showed up all those levels of employees, and what we want to know as Neil starts to tailor his remarks in his presentation to you, how many employees do you have? You saw there are many things that kick in right at 1 employee. There's things that kick in at 4 employees, things that kick in at 15. So we want to get a sense of how many employees you have in your organization today, and so therefore we get a sense of which of these apply. So as we start to see the results trickling in, I'm going to give you a few more seconds to respond. Okay, if people could, do you see the poll question? And we're going to take it. So you have 1 to 4 employees. Many of you might have over 100 employees, and all these requirements kick in. So just take a moment, find your place, select one. I limited because in case people want to select 2, so please select 1. All right, I think I'm going to wrap it up in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Let's share the results. So great. A lot of you are over 100 employees. So guess what? All of these are going to apply to you. And but then we have a nice little. The next highest, most popular answer is at 15 to 49. And I think if you're getting close to that 49, you might be coming into where that 50 threshold hits. So good insights there. And so thank you for sharing that with us and giving the whole audience a sense of who's on the call with us today. And I'm going to open it up to our second poll. This will complete our introductions of who is on the call. So if we'll launch the poll, and want to get a sense of what prompted you to sign up for today's webinar? Why did you join this? I know you're all very busy people, got lots to do, so why did you join the webinar today? please select all that apply. So I gave you the option of hitting as many as you want. Some of you, especially in those smaller companies, 1 to 4, you might be just getting started and you're a bit overwhelmed. You know, Neil will have some advice for you there on, you know, which things, it's not what don't you have to worry about. It's like, well, what do you have to make a priority and focus your attention on? Maybe you've been doing this a while and want to make sure you're on the right track, make sure nothing new's popped up. You know, imagine a regulation changing. Or maybe you're running into an issue and something in our list of topics today spurred your interest and that's why you've joined us. Maybe you're growing and you're expecting to break through one of the thresholds in the near future. Or, you know, maybe all this stuff seems like so much work and, you know, you're wondering if there's any shortcuts. So I'm going to ask Neil after the poll if there's any shortcuts. But all right, just want to give you a few more seconds. 5, 4, if you haven't filled out the poll, this is your last chance. 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Let's share the results. Well, I'm glad 100% of you are trying to make sure you're on the right track. Always a good idea, you know, make sure that you are doing things right. You know, that when Neil goes over this material, I'm always surprised at things that I pick up. And so, you know, good choice there. And then a lot of you, you know, expecting to break through a threshold, a good number of you, as well as it seems like so much work, any shortcuts. So Neil, are there any shortcuts to all this?
Well, Brian, that depends on what you mean by shortcut. There's the shortcut of doing it the right way before you're absolutely required to do it the right way that can help some of these smaller businesses be ready. To me, the shortcut for these is just doing it consistently so it becomes a matter of course. But we'll go into these. We'll start going into these. So the next slide after our dear poll questions. There we go. Now, as I said before, we could spend a lot of time. We could probably spend the whole time going into each one of those laws. But the 3 that I'm choosing to focus a little bit more on for what you're going to design plans for are these 3 here. And they have thresholds of employees at 50 for each one. The Executive Order 11246, Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act, and the Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act. You see what the protections are, and the 503 Rehabilitation Act is based roughly on contract amount more than employee number. But you see that magic number of 50 employees popping up again. So who is the governing body that's going to be working with contractors on this? That would be the OFCCP, which is right there. OFCCP, Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. And what do? They offer compliance assistance. Now, one of the great things, and I've worked with them a few times in the past, is their front line of making sure that everybody's compliant is to offer comprehensive assistance to contractors so that when they have problems and they have questions, they can go to the website. And they have a great website. They have a lot of resources on there. I've even spoken to them on the phone, and I've gotten quite good information and good help. They're not out to ding people, so I've had employers that I've worked with think if I call the OFCCP, that might trigger something, that they will come and investigate us, and that, to my knowledge so far, has not been the sense. So that's their frontline service, is to give a compliance assistance so you can keep focusing on your business without having something in the background eventually derail you. They conduct evaluations, and evaluations can happen from a couple different ways. In your reporting that you have to submit annually, they could see some anomaly or some discrepancy that may indicate non-compliance in there, and that could trigger an evaluation. Or it could be a complaint from a candidate or an employee or previous employee that could come across the desk of the OFCCP. And OFCCP will partner and work in conjunction with the Equal Opportunity Commission and the Department of Labor sometimes in doing investigations. And the next step is the investigation. And the investigations could take a lot of different forms in how they investigate any allegations of wrongdoing or any data that looks like it's out of compliance. And then from the investigation could come enforcement actions. And that could be anything from conciliation agreement, which we'll talk about briefly. It could come in punitive damages, back pay. It could be stoppage of payment, loss of contract, or even disbarment of the ability to do business with the federal government. So the types of evaluations that the OFCCP conducts, they initially start with a desk audit. And it's a desk audit because if something comes across their desk, whether it's a complaint or whether it's a report that shows some indication of noncompliance, and that's how things will start. From there, they'll either have an on-site investigation or they could have a remote investigation. One word of caution, which will come up again later in this presentation, is if OFCCP shows up on your doorstep, you are required to permit them access to your books and records. So if they come on site, it's all open book. Then there could be complaint investigations, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. If you have a complaint of discrimination or any kind of unfair practice from an applicant, a current employee, or former employee, then they're going to investigate that. And from that could come enforcement actions or conciliation. Conciliation is a meeting between the OFCCP and the contractor in which an agreement is drawn up by which the contractor says they will address those problems and make corrective actions. And as long as the contractor abides by the conciliation agreement, then everything's fine. If, however, they violate that, then they could take further actions. I'll give you an example. Out of Huntsville, Alabama, Oral Arts Laboratory is a dental lab and manufacture. They manufacture prosthetics and dentures and things like that. They were recently, and I mean recently within the past couple of years, they had to pay $115,000 to resolve allegations of systematic hiring discrimination at their headquarters. And what this came out of was they were issuing manual dexterity tests to people that they were considering to put in their lab as technicians. And what the OFCCP found was the tests that they were administering had no validity, which means they were not related to, the test was not related to success on the job. And it was discriminating against certain classes of people that were protected classes that could possibly be doing those jobs if they didn't have those tests in place. So, and that brings up something else, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but this seems to be a good place to put this in, is there is adverse impact, and that's when you have an employment practice that on the face of it you believe is a fair practice, but has the impact of excluding or discriminating against certain types of people. I'll give you a quick example of it. Say firefighters, in order to be a firefighter, you're required to be 6 feet tall. Well, it makes sense on it because you want to be able to reach out and have longer reach and be able to climb and whatever. But if there are protected classes, women for instance, women would be unfairly burdened by that because not as many women are going to be 6 feet tall, and with some minorities that demographically don't usually grow to 6 feet tall. So that would be considered an unfair practice and subject to adverse impact. So what are your requirements as a federal contractor in the broadest sense? Because what we're dealing with today is the broad sense. I want to give you the main points of what you need to do in order to be compliant, and then give you some really basic broad brush things that you can do to start stepping up your game to make sure that those people that have indicated that they're at that 100 level threshold or above, to make sure they're always doing the right thing. And for those people that are below that, to make sure that they are seeing what's coming down the pipe as they grow their business. So in the broadest sense, and this is not, it includes but is not limited to these things, federal contractors are required to not discriminate, to have affirmative action obligations, file EEO-1 reports and VETS 100 reports. There are records that you need to keep, and we're going to go into more detail on the records that you should be keeping and how to keep them. As I said before, permitting OFCCP access. Notices and posters. When I go in to do HR audits with smaller businesses, one of the things I find consistently is notices that are required are not posted, or they're not posted in public areas. And by public areas in a small office, it's going to be a break room, it's going to be a supply room, a room that any employee would have reason to go in. Job postings. There are guidelines on job postings. Carrying the tagline of "We are an equal opportunity employer" should be on everything. The job postings, where they're posted. So there's availability to minorities, women, and veterans. Reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Do your job descriptions. Are they compliant to give reasonable accommodations? Are your employee policies referring to those reasonable accommodations? And then prohibition against retaliation. Anybody that brings a complaint cannot be retaliated against. So these are the broad picture requirements of a federal contractor. But for our purposes here today, because any one of those topics we could have a full-length conversation on and really drill down deeply to, I've decided to break it down into 3 R's, and that's keeping records, recording, reporting, all the required forms that are required for the government, and then reviewing, creating self-auditing processes. So without further ado, we will jump right into the first R of recording. Again, this is one of those lists that there may be more things on the list, but these are the ones that I want to speak to today. Job descriptions. I can't tell you how many times. I think over the course of my career, the 2 areas that I find most lacking in employers are job descriptions and performance evaluations. For some reason, they just don't seem like they're important. And I'm going to deal a little bit more with that in just a minute. Job postings and advertisements, keeping records of all that, your job offers, applications, all these things pertain to hiring, recruiting and hiring candidates, keeping interview notes. And I'll say a little aside about interview notes. Your interview notes should be on a matrix, not written on the resume or the application, and they should always be objective. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but for the time being, that's just something that I see, and every time I see it, I cringe when a manager writes a note that has nothing to do with the candidate's abilities, knowledge, skills, and abilities on the side of a resume, and then I need to throw it out and then talk to the manager about it. Test and test results. That example I gave you with Oral Arts Laboratory about the test. I personally am not a big fan of employment tests because I don't trust the validity. By the guidelines, if you're going to give a test, you have to, number one, show that it is absolutely related to the job and that it has a certain criterion of validity to predict success on the job from that test. I'm not a skeptical person, but in this area, I'm pretty skeptical. So if you are doing tests, if you have things like essay questions after someone fills out an application, that's fine. Just keep the test and the test results and whatever documentation you have that shows its validity. That's really, really important. And last on this list, but certainly not least, are your employment policies and procedures. You know, as federal contractors, you have certain policies and procedures that you have to have in writing. Your ethics, your timekeeping, your leave policies, things like that, your complaint procedures. All those things need to be on there. But having a good, comprehensive employee handbook is an essential as far as record keeping, because that is, in absence of any of these other laws, in the state of Virginia, where it's an employment will and right to work state, your employee handbook becomes another set of laws that you cannot violate your handbook. There's been some discussion on if you violate one of the policies of your handbook, you've actually invalidated the entire handbook. That, again, is an entirely different topic that we could discuss forever and ever. But for the time being, this is what we've got. I do want to talk about job description. As I said, that's one of the ones that is a hot button for me. And why would you have a job description? When I started thinking about why somebody should have a job description, it's one of those things that it seemed so obvious to me that it was hard for me to put into words why I would think it would be obvious for you. But having a job description is your baseline defense when you're showing compliance. If a job description is well crafted and hits all the right areas, that sets the basic expectations of the employee, communicates not only what they're expected to do, but the conditions under which they're to do them, and can also help you, away from the compliance standpoint, start to build a succession planning when you put job descriptions together. I know here at Neosystems, we've gone one step beyond job descriptions and started to get appraisal matrices, which are given out to each employee by their job title, and the employee can see what it looks like when they're doing their job to the meets expectation standards, but they can also see what they would need to do in order to be considered for promotion up to the next level. And that's for every job title we have in this company. It's a big task to undertake. It took us about a year to go through every job title here. If somebody wanted to talk about it offline, I could certainly help you in starting to do that. But it's that one step beyond job description. But for our purposes here now, let's talk about the initial heading. Heading information is the top part of the job. It needs to include your job title, pay grade or range, your reporting relationship, what position supervises this, or what positions they supervise, the shifts and hours and the likelihood of overtime or weekend work. Then underneath that, you're going to have the summary of the job. That's the general responsibilities and descriptions of key tasks and their purposes, like their relationships to customers, to coworkers, and others, and the results that are expected from that incumbent employee. Qualifications, whether you need an education, what type of educational background you need, the experience, the training, and all the technical skills you need to have on this job. Special demands are those things like needs to be able to lift 50 pounds or work in an unair-conditioned space, things like that. Make sure that, and I've had this many times before, if you put that somebody has to be able to lift 50 pounds, you better be able to prove that lifting 40 pounds will not get the job done. That's one of those things that for office workers it doesn't really come into play as much, but for other people, just make sure that you're accurate in what you need. The job duties and responsibilities. Now, there's a way to go into the more detailed job duties and responsibilities, and the way I look at it is this. Employers can cover 90 to 95% or more of most tasks in just a few statements. You don't need pages and pages of job duties. But the way I would arrange it is put your most important or the job function that takes the most time first, and then put them in order, descending importance or descending time that it takes to do each of those. One word of caution in job descriptions: do not put in how the job is to be done, only the outcomes. The reason being is if you put in how the job is to be done, how a certain procedure is to be accomplished, you may run into problems with the Americans with Disabilities Act if someone needs accommodations and can't do the job in the prescribed steps. You have to be flexible in job descriptions. Another area off of this previous slide that talks about all your responsibilities as a contractor is recruiting and hiring. And this is one where you can make a really big impact in how you do business. Now, you're required to track all job postings and advertisings with the number of responses. And we're talking about number of responses in those designated minorities, women, disabled, veterans, all those. You would need to track them. So creating files to record applicants per job, retaining all the applications and resumes for 3 years. I know the common wisdom says 2 years for that. When it comes to length of time to retain a document, I am more in favor of 1 year extra. For me, what I found in doing it 3 years is that job will come open again, and I would like to have 3 years history to go back and see how the job's changed so I can do whatever analysis I need to do in order to get the right candidates for the job. I talked earlier about interview notes. Create a standardized sheet. I'll tell you really briefly, a quick way to do it is if you take the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required for that job and build a matrix. It can be something as simple as Excel, and give a rating of 1, 2, or 3 to each candidate, 1 being doesn't meet, 2 being partially met, 3 is perfectly fine, and you keep your notes on that and keep them objective to those knowledge, skills, and ability. At the end, you can total up your scores on each one, and you have an easier hiring decision, and one that is more likely to be compliant because it's based on those knowledge, skills, and abilities and nothing else. Retain employee tests and backup for validity. I've already talked about that. Now, to summarize in this recruiting and hiring thing, here's what I've done in the past. Every time there's a job opening, I create a file and I put the requisition in. I put all the copies of the ads we run with where they ran, and then I create a cover sheet, a matrix sheet. This will have each of the sources I used with how many candidates from each of the protected categories applied for them. I will then keep all applications and resumes in the file. They'll be given to in the case of my previous work, I gave them to the managers, let them look at them. When they gave them back, I would put the ones that weren't selected and keep those together, and the ones that were selected, I would mark them on my cover sheet as moving forward. And then when the final decision was made, I'd put a copy of the offer letter and then finalize the report, bind it together, and put it in a file. And I would keep that for 3 years. If you get in the habit of doing that and knowing that you need to keep things like that, it makes it much simpler. When I first started doing that years and years ago, it was a little tough to keep remembering at first, but now it just becomes second nature to me. And anytime anybody wants to know, and I've been very lucky, I knock on wood, that I haven't had to represent my organizations very many times in discrimination or other cases, but every time I have, that employment file is right there with everything as it should be, with everything in order and completely compliant. And just being able to show an auditor that comes in that you've got this, even if that's not what they're looking for, that shows that you have intent to comply with the law, which is going to go a long way for you. Okay, one of the questions, I put in this slide because I get this question a lot, and it's, we get all kinds of candidates, but we don't know who to track and who not to track. And when does somebody become an applicant? So for the purpose of this today, I'm using technology-based because, as you know, more and more people are applying online, coming through your company website or referred through something else. And these are the 4 criteria for what makes somebody a candidate in the eyes of the OFCCP. Number 1, the candidate submits an expression of interest related to your job. Number 2, that you consider them for that particular position. That means you read their resume and, okay, we received it, we got it. Number 3, their expression of the interest indicates a basic qualification for the job. They have to have the basic qualifications. And to illustrate this, I'll give you a really far-out example. I'll tell you about the favorite resume I received of all time. This was from a gas station attendant in California. I was working in Fairfax, Virginia at the time, who had decided he wanted to have a career change and saw that the association I was working for was hiring technicians with certain expertise, and he wanted to put his name in for consideration. He did so by sending me a handwritten letter in pencil on elementary school lined paper saying, I'm interested, I'm ready for a change, I kind of want to see what the East Coast is about, and he included a picture of his reference. His reference was his hunting dog. Now, for a while, we all joked about this, thinking that it was a joke, but he actually called to follow up to make sure that we had gotten it. The point of me bringing this up is he didn't meet the basic qualifications for the position. So in my world, he wasn't really considered an applicant. This fourth one is kind of interesting because on the face of it, if somebody says, oh, wait, I'm not interested anymore, take me out of consideration, that's fine. But another way that the OFCCP considers someone having removed themselves from a job offer is if after the online application you have a series of questions or there's a test they need to perform, if they never complete that test, they have removed themselves from the process and are then not considered an applicant for the job. Okay, the second of my R's is report. Now, there's some reporting outside of this. Again, with every list I show you, it's going to be a smattering of some of the things, but may not include all of them. Obviously, when you hit that threshold, you're going to have an EEO1 report. EEO1 reports pull from the data that you should have gotten at application. You had that self-disclosure, that voluntary self-disclosure thing of somebody saying whether they're a Vietnam veteran or whether they're a minority class and all those other things. That's where your EEO1 data comes because the candidate selected will have that on there. A VETS 100 or 100A is very similar to the EEO1 report at the high level. It is an EEO1 report for veterans. So instead of looking at women and minorities, it's looking at veteran status. Affirmative action plan, I included this with reporting, although it's not something you have to report into the government. It's something you need to have available. It should be something that's on display or something that is accessible to employees and candidates. And we could spend much time on affirmative action plans because they can become very detailed. The last one I put in there is one that's actually pretty topical, and I just couldn't let the opportunity go without putting something in there. With the Affordable Care Act, there are reporting requirements, and in 2014, employers could voluntarily report. Well, you can probably guess how many employers voluntarily reported. Not a whole heck of a lot of them. But the party's over. In 2016, by the end of January, all employers over 50 employees are going to have to file a 1094-C, which is a batch report containing the 1095-Cs and a cover sheet that goes to the federal government because they are going to be auditing you to see if you're compliant with the Affordable Care Act. I would quote you figures of what the fines are if you're found not complying, but just suffice to say it's worth your while to comply with this. Now, the good news is if you are insured through a carrier or you have a broker, they're the ones that are going to be doing the reporting for you. If you are self-insured, it's all on you. Now, the bad news is the carrier can report, but they can only report from the data that you collect and give to them, and some of that is not already available in the carrier. So you better have a very good HRIS system, or as one consultant told me, if by September 15th you have not addressed this issue, you should dedicate one person full-time for the rest of the year to do nothing but that. So there, I've given you my scare tactic for the day, no more scare tactics. But what I want to do now is I want to go back to this EEO1 report and just show you, for those of you that are in that category where you're not at that threshold yet, those of you with 100 employees or more, you may be familiar with this. But this is what a simple EEO1 report looks like. On the left-hand side, you've broken it down into job categories, and then you'll see across the top the different Hispanic or Latino, non-Hispanic or Latino, and the different groups that it's broken into. And your job is to group those employees into those sections and then report it. It gets reported online. to the EEOC, and as I said earlier, that's September 30th. If you have a good HRIS system, we use UltiPro here. I don't know what you use there. We use UltiPro, and it can take me 30 seconds to submit that report because the data is already there. It's already in the right format. As long as I've been maintaining my database in an accurate fashion, and that speaks to that part down the left-hand side, grouping the people into the right categories. And, of course, the EEOC has definitions for each of those, so you can kind of play around with those. I'm not going to show you the VETS 100 because basically, as I said before, it's the EEO with veteran status. There are little differences. But this is your 1095-C. We're back to the Affordable Care Act. So I've got my soapbox, and I'm going to stand on it for one more minute. This is a form that you're going to have to give every employee, every full-time employee, and full-time employee under ACA is defined as anybody working 30 hours or more. Now, the top part in Section 1 is really easy to fill out. It's Section 2 that's going to get to be a nightmare for you, because in that first Section 14, there are 9 different designations that you could give that employee. And it's something as simple as whether it's individual coverage, employee and spouse, family, whether they opted out, all kinds of things. But you notice you have to do it per month. And on the next column down, you have to write what their benefit cost for that month was. Well, that may seem easy if your benefits run on a calendar year. But if your benefits don't, like our benefit year starts September 1, you're going to have to go through month by month and see if anything changed. If an employee came into your organization with only 4 months left out of the year, you would blank out the others and do that. So this is a form that's going to have to go to every single employee. If possible, get with your carrier. If you've got a broker, get with your broker. Start making plans now. If you take very little away from this webinar, take that this needs to be dealt with because you don't want to deal with it in December and January. Okay, the last of ours is review. And by review, I'm talking about those self-auditing practices and systems that can help you to navigate these waters. That includes your hiring sources. Auditing your hiring sources. I don't mean to pick on the Washington Post, but they're the first ones that come to mind. So if you're advertising the Washington Post and you find that you're getting a lot of white males but not a lot of anything else, rethink your hiring sources. Audit them consistently to see what type of demographics we are getting from each of our hiring sources. Same with your personnel activities. Look at it from a compliance standpoint. Look at it from affirmative action and from all the OFCCP requirements. Are we training? Are we hiring? Well, first of all, are we sourcing? Are we hiring? Are we training? Are we promoting? Or even are we terminating people that are in disproportionate quantities by protected class? Always be looking at that. Looking at your compensation. Now, one of the things that we haven't dealt with today, because that's, again, a whole different conversation, is SCA. If you're in an SCA contract, you could have 2 people that are doing exactly the same job, but if they're under different contracts, you're going to be required to pay them differently. You need to be able to track those things. Also, again, from an affirmative action standpoint, review your compensation levels to make sure that you don't see any anomalies come out that have, for instance, women being paid 10% less than men that are in exactly equal jobs. And, of course, doing a job description analysis. And here's the way I suggest doing a job description analysis. Earlier in the conversation, I told you the 2 things that I find to be most problematic with employers is getting them to update job descriptions and getting them to do performance reviews. My suggestion, and the way I've always approached this, is at the performance appraisal time, whether it's on anniversary date for the employee or whether it's done one time of year universally for all employees, that job description should be part of the performance appraisal. It's an opportunity for the employee and manager to sit together, to go over that job description, to edit it, to make sure it's still accurate, and then have the employee, well, after it's all edited and the edits have been made permanent, have the employee sign it and date it. This ensures that that employee knows what's expected of them as laid out in the most current job description. And if you have HR, always leave a copy of the job description with HR. All right, so to keep on top of compliance, when I was thinking about this, I wanted to boil it down to two main areas, which we've already talked about, but I really want to drive these home for you, is that when you recruit to attract qualified candidates, when you start your employment life cycle with compliant practices, best practices, the rest of it seems to work itself out. Identifying multiple recruitment sources for women and minorities. Again, back to the beginning, the OFCCP has a wealth of resources that you can use to attract women and minority candidates. Proactively recruit. That means if you know of a certain group within the community and you know of a job opening, invite them to apply. Don't just put it out there and wait for them to apply. You can actually be out there trying to source that, just like some companies want entry-level people will have college recruitment days. You can have targeted recruitment towards minorities. Also consistently monitor each source. So like I said earlier with the Washington Post, if you're not getting the right stuff, you need to start diversifying your approach to your recruiting. The other main thing is auditing your practices to prevent discrimination. With any employment decision you make, whether it's a hiring, whether it's performance management, promotion, demotion, or termination, evaluate it from the impact of OFCCP compliance before you make the decision, and then do a debrief. Anytime every time I engage in a disciplinary action or I conduct a termination, I do a debrief to make sure that all the compliance points were met, and from my standpoint as an HR professional, that the employee affected was left whole and complete. Look to where females and minorities may be or not be in your organization. The easiest way to do this is pulling up an org chart, and instead of having it by person's name, have it by gender and minority status, and then look and see if there are any gaps in there. Likewise with jobs, look at your jobs and identify them in groups. At Neosystems, one of our areas is managed accounting services, and we have job title accountant 1, 2, and 3. Well, if an auditor comes in to look at us, they're not going to look specifically at accountant 1 to see if there's discrimination. They're going to look at the like jobs, and they'll say, it might be interesting to look at the accountant 1 where the minorities and women are, but the accountant 2 and 3 up the career ladder tend to be white males. That would be a discriminatory practice. When you look at job groups, when you start to analyze them, the way to do it is by looking at jobs that have equal opportunities, so they all have the same opportunity, they have equal pay, and they have equal job functions. Those three things are important when looking to analyze jobs in groups. And then review your compensation at least annually. Now, here's a chance for me to put in a shameless plug. I'm former president of the Washington, D.C. chapter of SHRM, Society of Human Resource Managers, and one of the best compensation surveys I've ever seen put out was put out by HRA-NCA. That's the chapter name. And they do a subset for government contractors where you can benchmark your salaries. Comes out annually. It's not inexpensive, but it's very well done. And I can say because I've worked behind the scenes on them. I have no affiliation to them anymore other than just being a member. But if you're looking for something to benchmark your compensation on to make sure you're in the right market to attract the people you need to attract, that's your survey that you'd want to use. So in summary, I just want to leave you with these things, and I don't know that I need to over-talk about it. Creating your system for tracking, like I did with the recruitment files or any of your EEO information. reviewing all your communications, all of your applications, job postings, external communications should have that tagline of "We are an equal opportunity employer." One important thing is to appoint an individual as a compliance officer. Usually if you have an HR department, it normally falls to them. I think it's good to have somebody outside of human resources as part of as a compliance committee. The only thing I would caution about is if you are going to have a compliance officer or compliance committee, you have to give them authority to dictate changes. Senior management has to buy into it, or else there's no point in it at all, and you're actually increasing your risks if a compliance audit is found. Last but not least, we'll skip to the other. You can review and update your handbook, regulations, and everything else, but the last and what I really want to leave you with is be proactive. Don't wait until you hit the threshold of 50 employees or 100 employees to start implementing and start thinking in terms of what the OFCCP wants from you. What does the EEO want? What does the Department of Labor and all these other entities? If you start acting like you're at that threshold already, it could help you win a contract, and it could also ease your pain if you go from a small to a large. One of most recent clients I've worked with is going from 5 employees to 350 employees within the space of 60 days. You think they're not thinking about their new compliance issues? It's a nightmare for them, and luckily I'm helping walk them through it, so it's going to be a little less pain and strain. So with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and if people have questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thanks, Neil. That was very informative. And yep, we're going to be opening up to your questions in just a moment. So if you have questions, please type them into the question box. This is just a quick recap of our Positioning to Win series. This is the next to last one you've been participating in, navigating your new HR compliance requirements. And if you are interested in any of the previous ones, want to get a copy of the deck, hey, just reach out to us. We'll have that contact info up in just a moment. Reach out to us, let us know. We'll be sure to get that to you. And also, if you're interested in, hey, you know, our outsourced services are for me, what should I be outsourcing, what shouldn't I be, what are the top 10 benefits of outsourcing? If you have questions like that, join us for the webinar on Thursday, July 16th. We'll be covering all that in detail, as well as recapping some of these particular areas that we've covered previously. So now I'd like to open it up to your questions. And so if you would type in your questions into the question box, we'll be sure to answer them. We had a question in here. What was the name of the compensation survey that Neil mentioned in the presentation? Neil, could you repeat that one, please?
Yeah, as soon as I saw that, the name of it went right out of my head. The organization is HRA-NCA, and you can get to their survey by going to hra-nca.org. All the information on the compensation survey is there. I've actually used it for over 10 years, and it's by far the most valuable. One of the reasons I like it is because it doesn't come like some of these other surveys do with a hidden agenda to sell you something. They put it out as a service of being the Washington, D.C. chapter. And it's great information. Plus, there are a lot of people that can help you with it if you have questions about it. They have full staff of people working on that. So I don't remember the exact name, but the website again, hra-nca.org, and you'll be able to find all the information on the survey, how to order it. It usually comes out in the August time frame, but you can check it on the site. So thank you for that question.
Hey, Neil, we got another question about you mentioned the ethnic reporting, and what if the applicants don't want to put in their ethnic information at the time of application?
That is a good question. You cannot make them candidate do that, obviously. You can't force it. That's why it's called voluntary self-disclosure. I did have an interesting story about that. And there was a hiring manager that was having some heartburn about this voluntary self-disclosure because applicants were coming in person and filling out the application. And he said the only people that are disclosing are white males. He said, I'm sitting there face to face with females and they are not disclosing, so how am I supposed to tell what they are? And so I could understand from his point, he didn't want to make it look like only white males were applying, but he had to give something to others. Now, the one thing the OFCCP doesn't tell you what you have to do, it does tell you what you can't do. And what you can't do is guess, guess when they're not there in front of you. Somebody applies online, you see a name that suggests a certain ethnic background, and you guess about it. You can't do that. You can only basically go with what you've got. So thank you for that question.
And I'm going to try to rush in a couple more here because we've got a couple coming in right now. Neil, I'm curious about, we have a question here about training. Do we do in-person training or on-site training?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I love doing in-person training. In-person training to me, I've worked with managers, I've worked with rank and file employees, I've created whole systems of management training. I think the largest one I did was a 2-year program, but certainly there can be one-off things, training on particular topics. And it doesn't even have to be on this topic. I have given training on sexual harassment, good hiring practices, how to deal with difficult employees, disciplining for attitude, things like that, employee motivation. So yeah, there are lots of different things, as well as doing compliance audits. I mean, along with training, I'm also, I've got a long background in going into companies and looking at their employee handbooks and their personnel files and making sure that they're compliant.
Okay, very quickly now. Actually, I'm going to turn this question around. We have one question about other webinars that we're planning for the rest of the year. I'm going to turn that around to our audience and ask you to, just if there's a topic you would like us to explore and share with you. We love putting out these educational sessions. So if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, please just write that. Say future topic, and write what you'd like us to talk about and share with you. We're always happy to share our best practices and tips with the people. Our goal is that keep you from making mistakes and helping you to grow your businesses. We're dedicated to helping you grow your business. I also just want to highlight we've also been doing these breakfast seminars for those of you who are local to the Virginia area, and we have one that's coming up. It's mentioned as for nonprofit, but a lot of overlap with the GovCon space, talking about mapping the customer journey. It's on June 26th. It's a Friday just coming up in a couple of weeks. And so if I suggest you check that out if you think it might be of interest to you or somebody else in your company. A lot of us, trying to understand our customers and get a better sense of their processes and how they do business, so helpful to many of us as we try to win new business. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. If we didn't get to your question or you have more questions, feel free to reach out to Neil or myself. Our email addresses are up there right now. And on behalf of NeoSystems, thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Navigating Your New HR Compliance Requirements. Thank you.